which our team will be copy pasting for everyone's views. And we are requesting participants to also address to specific panelists if they can do, so that it will be viewed by all the panelists, including you, and then basis that you can pick it up and then answer. So we are live now. Starting, good morning. My name is Vikas Mohan. On behalf of CII, I welcome you all to the CII CFO Conclave. This is the second day of the CFO Conclave. We have the third session scheduled today. We have had two very interesting panel discussions yesterday covering themes: economy, where do we go from here, and risks, how CFOs are grappling with the new unknown. Lots of insights, lots of wisdom, lots of experience sharing and learnings were gained yesterday. But today's panels are equally thought-provoking, stimulating, and motivating, with an opportunity to learn yet more. The theme for today's panel discussion is Fortifying the Corporation in the Digital Age. It is my pleasure and honor to present to you a panel having immense experience and expertise. We have with us Mr. Ajay Bahl, Chairman, CII Task Force on Judicial Reforms and co-founder and managing partner, AZB and Partners. Mr. Bahl will also be moderating this panel. Mr. Jatin Dalal, CFO Wipro. Mr. V. Ramakrishnan, CFO Tata Consultancy Services. Ms. Preet Duper, CFO IKEA. Mr. Krishnawat Dutt, Managing Partner, Argus Partners. Mr. Leher Apia, Consul, IBM India and South Asia. Mr. Vineet Tardesai, CFO Mindtree, and Mr. Akshay Garkal, Partner, Grant Thornton, Bharat. Thank you all for your time and for kindly agreeing to join today's panel. We are indeed privileged, as among all of you, we have the combined wealth of 200 years plus of wisdom and knowledge joined together, who will be sharing their insights and hands-on experience. I look forward to listening to you all, and I am sure participants would also be all ears to listen to your insights and views. Before handing over to Ajay, I would also like to thank our partners to the conclave. I would like to sincerely thank our technical partner, Grant Thornton Bharat, co-partner AZB and Partners, and associate partners C2FO India, Kroll, a division of Duff and Phelps, Primus and Insolvency Resolution and Valuation Services firm, Tata Consultancy Services, and Tata Power Company. For announcement, and this is for the participants. As we did yesterday, we plan to spend last 15 minutes for the Q&A. If you have any question, please write in Ask a Question box addressing to the specific panel member. Panel will then pick it up and answer your question as feasible and for time permitting. So with these words, I once again welcome you all to the third session in the CII CFO Conclave. And may I now invite Mr. Ajay Bahl, Chairman, CII Task Force on Judicial Reforms, and co-founder and managing partner, AZB Partners, for his opening remarks and to moderate the session, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, fellow panelists. Good morning, participants. I think one of the advantages of work from home is that even a 10:30 session possibly gets people to participate. If it was a physical forum, we would be still waiting to see people walk in and stroll in, especially given that it's a Saturday morning. But a warm, cold, cool welcome, depending on which part of the country or the globe you are at this point of time. I think we are very, as Vikas said, we have a very, a terrific panel. We have CFOs who run some of the best known companies which have both domestic and international footprints. And we have a balance with lawyers, in-house, external, and we have a consultant who I'm going to treat partly as an auditor, even though he's not, but he has the fortune or misfortune of being associated with something which has an accounting arm. So Akshay, there will be a few questions. Please try and wear a auditor's hat as well if you can. So we have two themes to cover today. One is COVID-19 virtualization, a backdoor to increased fraud risk, more forward-looking, obviously. Similarly, cybersecurity and data protection, in the current environment, creating a crisis response and business continuity policies. So as we move on, let's get straight into the session. Start with the first theme. So I know that we are looking ahead, but I can't help, in light of some of the experiences of the past few years, I have to pose this question to the panelists, and particularly to CFOs, and I'll direct it to specific members of my panel. So when we look at digitization, there is no question, I think all of us agree, that digitization has greatly enhanced the capability of organizations to collect data, assimilate data, analyze data, enhance communication capabilities, enhance the ability to analyze and assess the data in terms of decision-making, strategies, and so on and so forth. So there is clearly efficiency. But I do want to ask the question, have we created safer organizations from a point of view of whether it's misstatement and financial statement, fraud incidents, and basic human intervention when it comes to trying to do things which are not the right thing to do? And this is going to be relevant to both our themes, but I want to start with this in the context of financial statement, financial reporting, particularly the events of the last few years. And Mr. Ramakrishnan, I'd like to ask you the question first. Do you really believe digitization has made us safer before we look ahead at what happens during COVID and post-COVID?
I think the short answer is definitely yes, because you touched upon it. Digitization and use of technology has given immense benefits to your organization, because in terms of, if you look back in the last 20-25 years, with the increased use of ERP systems and the way systems have been integrated, right? And earlier, a lot of discrete or disparate systems, and where people were working in silos, functions were working in silos. With increasing use of ERP and more integration, I think the ability to drive efficiency and to also bring in a lot more controls, etc., have actually improved. So the implied question is, some of the misdoings or financial misreporting, etc., is it more digitized? I think that is not appropriate. I would say that will be, if that diagnosis will lead to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In fact, the digitized environment actually helps you to actually control and have the checks and balances, the use of analytics, etc., to prevent and detect and help in addressing this problem. But then you may ask, then why are every now and then we hear of cases, both internationally as well as in India, in the recent past in India, some of the NBFCs, etc. But if you really look into it, you will find that it is more a collusion at very senior levels, and actually it is not because of digitization. It is because there has been a systematic attempt at beating the rules, and so that it's not new. I mean, we go back to the Enrons and the WorldComs, and over the last 20 years we have this one. So it is neither related to COVID or to digitization. And while we do hear because of COVID, do hear in the digital payment space, etc., increased threats of trying to beat the system, I don't think there's been enough evidence that this has resulted in areas like financial reporting or misreporting, etc., because of the current environment, or it perhaps early to tell. But the short answer is, I don't think digitization has made us unsafe. It has, on the other hand, it has given us enough opportunities to make it safe. And it's a culture, etc., and other aspects, which is a different subject, which helps you to actually do that.
Preet, do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, yes, I do, and maybe a slightly different perspective here as well. So first of all, I totally agree with you, Mr. Ramakrishnan. As a CFO, your best friend in today's environment, you have two best friends in today's environment. First is actually your digital, the chief digital officer, and the second is your business risk and compliance manager. And these are kind of the two pillars on which I think we need to operate. So totally, whatever you said about ERPs, more secure information, end-to-end transaction, monitoring, knowing where your data is, totally agree to that. Having said that, in the current environment, it is also a fact that COVID has become, made the environment today a fertile ground for fraud. People are facing tremendous health and financial risks, and that does make people more vulnerable, right? And nobody operates without people. People are at the heart of everything we do. The other bit I'd like to, and this is more, COVID is not something that's going to go away, in a hurry. Or today there is a crisis, tomorrow there will be another. There is also this urgency in urgency, which is the norm. People are looking at their operating models. People are actually looking to, companies are looking to survive. So I think in that kind of an environment, the risk does increase. It's not just digitization. And just as digitization makes transactions easier, it also makes fraud easier. So that's kind of the other part. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? So something that is actually designed to protect you can, if you don't put checks and balances in place, can also harm you. So that's the other angle I'd like to present. And actually another very interesting thing that we see across organization, WhatsApp has become an alternative method of official communication. Yeah. And if the one thing we can do is please tell our people, do not put confidential information, on WhatsApp. You spoke about payment frauds. I think that they were there, but they have increased. Payment frauds for sure, have gone up. And it goes back to the fact that people are more vulnerable today. Companies are more vulnerable. The economies are struggling, and that does open us up to risk more than ever.
So thanks for that. I think so. In summary, digitization has made potentially is safer. It creates efficiencies, and I take that. And I don't mean to suggest that I disagree, though my next question, which is to Jatin and Vineet, might give you that suggestion. But I think it's a different angle that I want to explore here. So you're right that digitization has made you safer, etc. But if you look back over the last few years, and you look back, I think with the inflection points being in some ways the whole NPA reporting and then the IBC and what it threw up, not in terms of genuine business failures, but in terms of allegations that emerged from that whole debate and what we saw. The kind of frauds or misstatements that have occurred are so basic. Still, the old stuff of payments against invoices for fictitious services, fictitious goods, acceleration of sales to trump up profits of a quarter or a year, fake sales to trump up valuations, diversion of funds, thinly disguised related party transactions. So, Jatin, the question is to you, what are we missing here? Is it that the digitization isn't to blame? That is possibly the right way of looking at it. But have we has human skepticism given way to systems and digitization and technology, and are we somewhere losing that balance of our own human oversight, human skepticism when we approach financial statements and we approach whether as a CFO or as a statutory auditor or as an external advisor, are we too dependent on technology and digitization? So, Jatin, some perspective from you on that, please.
Sure, Ajay, and it's a very topical question. I would suggest we have always looked at a basic mantra, and basic mantra is that the brilliance will come from the mind, and your safety net will come from your processes and strength of processes. So an organization needs both to be what it is. Uh, I fundamentally, I'll go back to what Ranki said, and I deeply sort of resonate with that point of view, that as a CFO, we feel far more safer with some of the checks and balances which digitization has been able to give. For example, multi-factor authentication. So you can't even if you steal somebody's password, it's going to be very difficult for somebody else to execute a transaction on your behalf. Or sheer audit trail on, if for example, if you consistently use SharePoint for exchange of, let's say, an M&A related transaction which you don't want to leak, you will have audit trail of everything that has been exchanged. And even if there is a question around need to know and others which we all are very familiar with, you can very comprehensively prove to somebody outside, but more importantly, internally, you feel comfortable that nobody has access what he or she shouldn't have. Or simply looking at analytics, we have about 200,000 employees. On an average, they raise 5 claims in a year, in a month. So on an average, we process a claim of around 10 lakh claims a month. No human mind can actually find fraud from this 10 lakh claims. No smart chartered accountant can find it. But we have found analytics has given us immense insights into who's claiming consistently more, which claim was potentially, which bill was claimed before. It's impossible for a human mind to catch. So those are I think very comforting positions at a transactional level. And Preet also referred, transactionally, I think we feel very, very safe. But I have also seen that sometimes people over rely on technology and over rely on process strengths, and they don't do basic old-fashioned managerial review, looking at things little together and seeing that if these 4 facts exist, should I not be asking a question because it does look fishy. And that's something that we are trying to preserve, and I think that's a challenge, constant challenge for any organization, to make sure that the managerial review, putting context to transaction is not substituted or cannot ever be substituted by digital technology. So that's what is a constant battle, Ajay. On one hand, we continue to strengthen transactions. On the other hand, also keep people very honest about their role, especially at supervisory levels, as to what they should be doing. That's where I will.
That's very pertinent. So I think in summary, we can't do without technology, no question about it. But we know that we have to rely more and more on technology and digitization, given work from home, given the COVID scenario. But the reason I have this skepticism is that if everything was so good with the technology that we've introduced, why were things not being surfaced in all these years, and why did they suddenly surfacing just because we have 2 or 3 inflection points, some changes in the law, some changes in reporting requirements? Suddenly you have treasure trove of companies which were going concerns till yesterday ceased to be going concerns, and when you examine them closely, the issues and the kind of things that are at least alleged to have happened are not so sophisticated. They are still pretty basic. So Vineet, putting you on the spot. So I think the point I was trying to make is that yes, we all must accept that technology is relevant, very critical. Volumes of data are so extensive now that the old style physical work cannot let that happen. But do we need more human intervention, both in terms of internal to the organization and those who are supposed to externally check in on the fairness and trueness of the financial statements and their sampling techniques, etc.? Do we need a greater human element to come back, particularly now that we are going to be even more dependent on technology? So Vineet, I'd like to hear your perspective on that.
No, thanks. Good morning, everyone. My couple of points. First of all, I think so there is no perfect answer. This is an ongoing evolution that we all need to live with and keep on finding out the right solutions. Digitalization has definitely helped all of us. There is no second thoughts about it. But let me also put a perspective about it. Where does this start? Really, it all starts with the culture of the organization. If you look at majority of the fatal frauds that have happened in the system, I think so they are not driven by, they are not happened because of the errors or the small things that happen typically at a junior or mid-sized employee. They have happened at the leadership level. And that's where the cultural aspect about what your organization's motto is. How do you look at the things? Do you have a zero tolerance policy for any of these things? I think so these are important, and you have to walk the talk, literally. There is no other substitute other than this. The day you diverge from this, I think so you have started digging your own grave. On the second part, let me also say that internal controls are there in most of the organizations, but that's just the beginning. Processes need to be implemented. They need to be strengthened over a period of time. They need to be tested regularly for the effectiveness that will protect the property of the organization efficiently. And they have to be automated at the earliest to avoid the manual intervention. But after this is not the end of it. You have to look at data analytics that will give you red flags, which will tell you what the problem is, and also probably also go one step further and have a prescriptive solution to what can be rectified. Sometimes it can be false alarms. Sometimes it can be a genuine thing that need to be looked at. Now this comes to your organization. The second aspect, which also I think so we all need to look at it, that our many of our employees work in a customer environment, which is outside the control of any company. There, I think so, constantly educating our employees, ensuring that we have the right checks and balances, having the good amount of dialogue with the customer to ensure that there are no errors that are happening, there are no indications of any wrong behaviors that are happening. I think so these are regularly need to be done. They need to be, there is no solution. I can't say that I have implemented a fantastic tool and I'm now fraud free from my organization. This is a constantly evolving journey, and we need to play this by the rules of the game that you define right from the top and follow it literally word by word.
Because the next question, I will pose a few riders on this question of does it only come from the top, because some of the stuff we have seen is done at a very mid-level and through just basic issues which were or basic things that were not done, not because the systems were faulty. But before I come to that, I'd like an external perspective. Akshay, what is your sense that you get being in an organization which is multifaceted, also has some relationship with audit organizations that you work as a part of your network. So give us a perspective of how you see these things.
Sure. Thanks, Ajay. You asked me to wear an auditor's hat, and I'll make sure that I answer from that perspective.
Thank you.
So, if you look at, I think most of the fellow panelists spoke about all the areas, and they've covered all the areas holistically. But if you look at digitization today, and if I apply an outside-in lens, digitization is, of course, there are no discussions in terms of why digitization is something which is useful to organizations, because we know that right from time to market to basically living the new normal, making sure that efficiencies are built, and I can just go on till the end of the day in terms of the advantages of going digital. However, agree to Preet's perspective that when you bring in a lot of sophistication, obviously there are complexities from fraud angle, there are complexities from the cyber angle as well. What I would like to highlight from an auditor's perspective is that what auditors are today looking at is, of course, the transactions. They are looking at the world of sampling essentially is becoming history, and auditors are pushing to look at 100% sampling size. However, having said that, with the pressure of basically reporting on time and submission and presenting to the audit committees, there is no ways that these audits can be conducted manually. So again, bringing in the angle of analytics, bringing in the angle of automation, bringing in the angle of defined use cases. And when I say defined use cases, it means that you basically don't restrict yourself to the use cases which essentially have been defined within the organization, but also bring the additional perspective of what could be the fraudulent angles from a benchmarking standpoint. So when you look at organizations who are basically operating in a similar space, what are the type of frauds that are possible, what are the type of perspectives that are possible, and bring those use cases to bear is something that today's auditors are looking. So that's the perspective I would, and of course I have a couple of more thought processes which I will be happy to share during the discussion.
Sure. Thank you. Well, we've now at least reached a conclusion that therefore digitization makes us safer. Yes, there needs to be the human touch and the human training, the human element can't be lost sight of, whether by an organization internally or those who look at the organization externally. And the basic, if there is a failing in our systems or our minds about skepticism, I think that needs to, we all agree, some way needs to be reignited so that we do not lose the balance that that technology also needs to be overseen, or the analytics of technology, as Jatin, you said, needs to be read by somebody, and common sense should not be discarded in just because the system throws something up. So I think now let's move forward to the situation where we are today. This was more the past, and see how now it's getting more difficult. So now we have 4 CFOs here, and 3 of you are CFOs of listed companies with even greater responsibilities. So you have the responsibility, and may I say the unenviable task of having to certify that the financial statements are free from any misstatement, from fraud, that your systems are robust, they are adequate to pick up frauds, and the audit committees rely on that. You have to give representations to the statutory auditors. So in that whole backdrop and where we are today, I'd like the 4 of you, we'll start in any particular order, I'll just pick, to identify maybe 3 or 4 areas where you see some incremental risk or some incremental vulnerability that bothers you at night. That is this whole COVID situation leaving us vulnerable somewhere? And I'll give one very basic example from days of our accounting days, physical stock taking, because we have actually seen examples where very automated companies have slipped because the physical stock audit wasn't done at the end of the year, and because it was done somewhere in the middle of the month, it enabled employees to accelerate sales from one quarter to another. So it's just a very basic one of physical verification of fixed assets and so on and so forth. But you know better. So let me start with Ramki. What are the 3 or 4 areas that you find yourself worried about in this paradigm? And this is not going to be on SEBI tomorrow morning. There's no price sensitive information element here, so don't worry about it. Just broad statements. It doesn't even have to be relevant to your organization. Just a broad sense of what you think. Mr. Ramakrishnan? Okay, while we're waiting for it, maybe we need. Sorry.
I think I'd gone mute for some reason.
All right,
sorry. So I think all the controls which we normally talked about in the physical or the non-virtual field, they have to be not only replicated, but they have to be strengthened in the current environment. Number 1. Number 2, I think there are 3 or 4 areas which come up, which have become more pronounced. I think you mentioned the UPSI, and that is itself important, because earlier we had everyone within a certain physical boundary, and then you had things like controls on you can't use pen drives and all sorts of things to make sure that we play. But today, when the teams are all working virtually and they are, and so the prevention of any leakage of UPSI and getting into insider trading, etc., is a increased threat. So, of course, training, reiteration, and other types of checks and balances, especially I think Jatin talked about sharing of documents, for instance, right? What can be shared, what should not be shared, how should it be shared? So all that becomes very important. The second area, I think we have always, despite the entire moving into digitized environment, there were still certain documents which needed to be physically signed, right? Certain bank documents, certain documents which you file with regulatories and all that. Today, with everything moving virtually, you are also moving some of those signatures, etc., also digital. I think people should not lose sight of any controls and checklists to also maintain some of those records for the future purposes. So we can't completely move away to digital environment. Third area is, of course, the access. Who is having access to the system? I think Jatin also talked about this multi-point authentication. So these are all basic things which this one. And I think you talked about inventory. I'm sure co-panelists Preet and others will have more insight. But with COVID or no COVID, I think things like using IoT, for instance, in across industries, whether it is in discrete manufacturing or in process industries, would have given a lot of benefits. And I'm sure organizations will embrace that even more, because just placing an inexpensive sensor on a particular piece of equipment or even a piece of inventory, you don't have to physically go there and verify. So I think some of those things are available. So, but definitely there are increased risks in this current environment, but there are ways to handle it. And one can never be rest assured that everything is done. So you have to, the culture and other things which other panelists talked about also comes into play. Thank you. You're on mute.
So, Preet, let me ask you, is there something that bothers you, keeps you awake every now and then about this period?
Okay, a lot of things, but let me speak about the ones I can speak of. But actually, interestingly, you mentioned inventory, and it's less audit issues that have kind of, that have kind of bothered you. I think I will go back to this whole paradigm of work from home, and how many people have access to data. The fact that people are accessing data from secure locations, right? And how do you monitor that? Because going back to an earlier environment where you had processes and controls in place, but they were designed for an environment which is far more secure than the environment in which people are working today. So I think that's kind of an important thing, because it's you are as secure as your weakest link. Yeah. And I think therefore what we're trying to do is actually map the entire paradigm of who has access to what information, which are the critical areas of data, which are the critical roles, how are they actually accessing internet? Because let's also accept that access to internet today, it is not cheap. If you're really looking for a strong broadband Wi-Fi connection, it doesn't come cheap. So how are organization actually enabling people to be able to work in a secure manner, I think is one thing. The other interesting thing, I think, is also the fact that there is increased dealing with the government, much more dealing with the government, particularly in a trade like ours, I would say, whether it is, for our expansion plans, or whether it is, dealing with some of the new regulation that has come with, for imported goods and customs and things like that. So there is increased dealing with the government, which also opens yourself to, certain risks. Then I think, this whole urgency of changing business models. Let's try something different. Let's do something different. And one of the things that we are monitoring is how many exceptions are we getting? What are the exceptions to the process? Because obviously all of us have been operating with well documented processes, systems in place. And therefore, going back to this whole, do we need human intervention? Probably yes, at some point of time, an application of mind of yes, why are we getting so many exceptions? What's going on here? What's the base of the transaction? So that's, I think, something that all of us, must focus on. And then I think you spoke about, culture, and I'll probably give you an example. In fact, that a bit of, are we ruling? Have the processes been robust, or have we had a more of a culture in place which is ruled by terror or, authority or, something like that, which is, if your CEO calls you to say you need to make an urgent payment, you can't contact anyone, you can't, this is a confidential, if you don't do this, it will go through. I'm sure, there are lots of examples that all of us as CFOs, have of, cases, or someone's called in your name to someone. Will that payment happen? What will the person's response be? Will that actually go through? Will the person actually have courage to sort of say challenge and say, no, I follow the process, I follow what I'm supposed to do. So it goes back again a bit to how robust were you in the first place? And, have you relied or created a culture where people are not afraid to challenge, people are not afraid to, follow what should be followed? And are you doing a reassessment in this environment of where are your data, critical data points lying, and how do you protect them?
So Jatin, everybody so far seems very comfortable, no sleepless nights in this environment. I trust you're going to tell me the same. Nothing that worries you incrementally from a reporting standpoint in this period. But I was using the word unenviable position to be in, but seems like it is not unenviable so far as what I've heard so from the others.
So yes and no. Yes, because I think financial statements controls, you try and envisage, some of the points which both Ramki and Pete has made. But let me say that are we living in a relatively unsafe world? The answer is clearly and vehemently yes. I'll give you one example. Bear with me for a second. So far in a non-COVID world, 200,000 employees of Wipro, or let's say 400,000 of another company, were going to office, and they were locking their doors of their houses, and they were going to office. How many keys were there for their houses? One key or two keys, maybe with the guy or the lady, right? And once they were inside the office, they were fine, they were secure, because whole world has relied on firewall as a basic system of protection forever. Okay. Now, I'll tell you the situation today. Situation today is this 200,000 employees are sitting at home. You have given 200,000 keys to your office. 200,000 keys to your office. And now you are trying to manage the enterprise same way as you were doing before. And is it not more riskier? It is definitely riskier. I think we are fooling ourselves as senior management if you are saying that it is not riskier if firewall no longer exists, because you are virtually, except for VPN, which I would say is reasonably safe. But otherwise, Akshay will tell you that internet is the most of the stateless sort of enterprise that is possible in today's world.
Right.
Look at your situation when your accountant is managing your bank account and he has opened some news website, let me not say any names, and there is a what is known as cross-domain attack there, some click fraud happening there. You are putting now companies' funds at risk for an individual's vulnerability so far, which was restricted to his own bank account, by the way, not company's bank account, because it would have got protected if that same thing instance would have happened within the enterprise, but it's now not happening here. So I personally worry, and I think every enterprise should worry and double down in terms of constantly asking yourself that are you being giving right messages, being extra conscious. Ramki spoke about Oopsie and how you manage it with information flow on SharePoint and other things. How do you still ask a few people to come to office who are doing very sensitive jobs like treasury and back office of banks? I think is still very critical in my view. Ajay, I'll leave it at that.
That's very candid. I appreciate that, because it would surprise me if we didn't think there were greater risks, and some of them we are going to talk about when we move to data protection and cybersecurity. But even in the financial space, what I hear you saying is that the position is clearly more fluid. potentially with all this happening, a very good example you gave of the keys and how many people are operating, how many people have access, and does that really increase the risk? And I'm sure that while you're smiling here, there must be more tension than you demonstrate here, actually, as you reflect on your quarterly results every year. And I can imagine challenging times. Vineet, what do you have to say about this?
I can't disagree with any of the panelists' comments that they have made. Honestly, I feel that the financial environment, in a financial environment, is probably less of a worry, and the technological exposure that we have given to the whole company, I think so that is a significant risk that worries me. I'm sure most of the companies have seen a significant increase in the spam mails that come in. And, one wrong click that goes undetected can put the whole company at a serious risk. Second part, which Preet mentioned, we are working from home. We all feel that we have great 99% productivity levels, but we don't understand that everybody is not on a secured environment. People are using either their personal phone hotspots or the dongles, which are not safer. You don't know who and what environment are they working. I think so. The important aspect of most of the companies in the future is going to be less on office upgrades, but more on the home infrastructure upgrade. Let's acknowledge this fact that work from home is going to stay here even post-COVID. It may not remain in the same levels as what we are today, but it is definitely going to be a part and parcel of the business. And when you say somebody has to work from home, earlier it was by convenience. Now you're probably going to mandate it to a great extent to a certain section of employees. And then in that environment, you cannot allow someone to work based on how he feels his home infrastructure should be. You have to have a defined security protocols. You have to define, there has to be tools which capture any potential data losses that can happen. Today, my worry is the data theft or intellectual property losses or data privacy issues are so penalizing because most of us have signed pretty significant liability contracts with our customers. And you can protect financial damage is probably the least of the worry, but the reputational damage that it brings along with that. And the trust today, everything is working on trust. Once that trust is broken, it will just create a chain reaction. And it can be really, really fatal for the organization. So honestly, I'm less worried on the financial aspect of it. I'm more worried on the technical aspects in the environment. So work from home is here to stay, but definitely not a sustainable from a long-term perspective in the same situation as we are working today.
Right. So we are going to come to that, the whole issue of working from home and the security of data. But is the takeaway, because we'll soon be moving on now to the other element, which is data security, is the takeaway that you do not feel that the financial risk of misreporting or fraud reporting is not as great in the work from home environment as these other elements? So is that in summary what I heard you say, that you're less concerned about the financial frauds being increased as a result of the COVID situation, but certainly there could be other implications on the financial statements, because if you have a data theft or if you have fraud, then there could be liability issues and so on and so forth, which is a separate issue, but it's not a fraud related issue. So is that a fair summary? Maybe I'll just go around the CFOs once too, because this is an important one, because this is the first part of our theme, that is COVID, a backdoor entry to greater fraud risk. So I hear you say that it probably is not a greater risk of fraud that you are worried about. It's the other risk which we will talk about subsequently. So is that a fair summary, Vineet?
I would say it's the financial fraud or the financial controls, etc. is I would say a little bit of a known devil. You've dealt with the past, potential areas. So you can do a lot of combinations of checks and balances and still probably control it. the aspect which I was talking about, the data privacy, data theft, etc., these are unknown devils.
That I understand.
Don't know, and that's the real worry.
Right.
And this is constantly evolving. The threats are increasing. A ransomware, sort of an attack on a company, we just don't know how to tackle it. Where you can put controls, tools, keep on doing all the necessary things. But this is the unknown devil that worries me a lot rather than the known devil.
Right. So, Jatin, do I take it that you have similar view that the financial, because as I said, people will be keen to understand, and I think generally speaking, given the wonderful profile we have of companies whose CFOs are here, it'll be very comforting to know that there could be implications, but per se, fraud risk you don't believe has significantly enhanced.
That is right, Ajay. That's right.
Okay. And I think Mr. Ramakrishnan already said that, and so has Preet, so I don't need to go around again. So,
Can I just say something? I think in general, yes, but it's also the fact that the data breaches will lead to fraud risk. So I don't think we can say that fraud risk, has not enhanced. So to cap the fraud risk, you need to cap the whole data environment,
right. Okay.
Which has become more vulnerable.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you clarified that, because I that's what I wanted to understand. That therefore there is some enhanced, according to you, there is some enhanced fraud risk because of the other elements. So there are two elements here. One is increased fraud risk, possibly, but more importantly, the unknown of how financial statements can get impacted through events that happen through data security breaches and so on and so forth. The implications, the legal consequences of that, potential liabilities. That can certainly be a more significant element here, and we'll come to that. Akshay, just finally, very quickly, your perspective before we move on.
Yeah. So Ajay, I just wanted to add to all the fellow panelists that they've mentioned, and I think very valid points mentioned by all. But I think the critical portion here is about the human intervention, and as we say, my security is as strong as my weakest chain in the organization. And at this point in time, assume if an employee or a professional is working from the organization and there are very strong security controls applied, even if they don't, even if unintentionally, they basically click on certain stray links or etc., there are security controls which can control them. Today, you may give me a very, very strong password, which may be in line to the compliance of the regulator or the policy, but if I'm sharing that password with you, even unknowingly, it's as good as opening my organization. And I'll restrict my comment on the ransomware because I would like to share some trends on how today's ransomwares are essentially moving and making a lateral move. However, I think what is more critical here is that how organizations are able to extend the security controls from the enterprise to the respective homes. How are they able to look at their risk assessment in a different way with this new normal coming in? And how are they able to classify what sort of information is flowing where? And I think this is the trend which most of the leading organizations have already started moving into, because, as rightly pointed out by Ramki and Jatin, that even if the COVID goes away, it would be a trend where most of the professionals will start working from home. Of course, some of the contact-based industries, as Preet mentioned, it would be difficult to kind of operate from home because you need to be on site. Barring that as exception, but definitely ITES organizations broadly will definitely continue to work from home. So how that enterprise can get extended, how the security controls can get extended to home is something that is going to be of primary importance.
Which we are going to be talking about. But I think the concern here, which is why the first theme was there, that are we looking at enhanced fraud and misstatement risk? And the sense we get is that yes, but that threat is not as severe as the threat of data security protection, the breaches, etc., and those may have positive implications or negative implications on the financial statement. So I think that's the takeaway that at least I have taken from this summary of the discussion.
Fraud risk may not be as high as much as as far as we are able to create enough user awareness, make sure, because we've seen some organizations where based on CFO approvals on emails, they have gone ahead and made payments from home because they have access to the systems from home. However, the additional check and balance of a simple thing but highly impactful of picking up the phone and asking the CFO that this is a high value transaction, can I go ahead and make it? Because there have been a lot of phishing emails which organizations have fallen prey to. And I can actually, list down a lot of organizations in today's time, only during this COVID period of these 2 quarters, where such incidents have basically taken a huge toll on organizations.
Okay, that's important. That's very important to know. Good. So I think that's a fairly good debate on this particular aspect. There's one question that I'm going to pose, which is not specifically arising out of our debate here, but it's a very important recent development in the LODR, and this is only for the listed companies. Jatin, as you're aware, there is a recent amendment in LODR that a company has to disclose the moment it commences a forensic audit or a forensic audit is commenced on it by a third party. And secondly, the company has to eventually file the entire forensic report with the stock exchange. So I'd like, since it's really not a part of the theme, but it's very important as a development, I would like some perspectives, but very short perspectives, good, bad, negative, positives, from you as a CFO of a listed company. How would you see this in the context of the markets, and how do you see this in this current environment that we are dealing with?
Sure. So Ajay, as you very rightly pointed out, it's a 8th of October amendment. So we know the date because you have to comply from that moment because it's effective immediately. It wasn't even there for public comments. I think what the intended objective of the change is to really bring to notice the investors truly a forensic audit in its nature, which is going to impact going concern or is materially impact the financial statements or operations or cash position of the company. I think that seems to be the intended objective. However, the way it is worded, it is bringing within itself almost the tiniest of the forensic work that we do on as a concern. I mean, forensic is a very loosely defined term, and at any point in time, any one of us would have 15 or some, odd audit going on where we are just looking at mailboxes to understand, how this transaction happened, etc. This is a fact around large organization, and forensic should be seen as a methodology and not as an end outcome of conducting an audit. So we have made representation that a better qualification around this would be highly useful, and a methodology to identify that criticality which requires an external disclosure would be highly useful. I do believe that audit committee must be properly briefed about it. They must sign off that this is truly forensic audit in the spirit in which the regulation requires, and then you go out. And not for everyone. Otherwise, we'll just spook the market with all sorts of data which is not relevant for the market.
Well, we've also made representation on the same line because there are so many elements that I don't want to go in detail, but I'm glad you also see it the same way as we've seen it. Mr. Ramakrishnan, do you have any views on that?
No, I think broadly Jatin covered it. It would help if there are some clarifications around it because it is too broad. Typically, forensic audit typically refers to financial statements, etc., but then by whatever name called actually increases the scope. Second is even if there was nothing, which eventually turns out, but the fact that you're going, you have to say that something is initiated, and in the current world, where even if you ultimately are innocent, some people will think that you are guilty, and the whole social media and the whole trolls, etc. So you will actually damage some market value. The second part is that you have to give the full report out. And there may be so many things, including witness statements and proprietary information. So I think it's too broad, and while the intent is to reduce that asymmetrical sharing of information, which is welcome, this can create a lot of havoc. But not all of us. But Jatin rightly said, even if you are checking emails of people just to check whether something has gone, that will itself fall under this. So no materiality here is going to cross the issues.
In fact, it's very interesting that, as you know, that if there is a fraud which is no KMPs involved, you are entitled to have thresholds below which you don't even have to report. And here the irony is that you don't have to report that incident at all, but you have to file a report without any materiality consideration. So yeah, so we've also made some representations. Vineet, do you share broadly the same concerns?
No, absolutely. So, too broad in nature. The materiality aspect of it needs to be factored in when really reporting. The other aspect I would just add is, again, many times this forensic audits would be extending outside the Indian shores, and there can be complications in terms of the data privacy issues that can come in. So those need to be factored in. While I need to be compliant with the law of land, I can't be non-compliant with the laws of other land where I operate. So I think the materiality aspect very important, and it can be sometimes just false alarms. We don't want the markets to get spooked with the false
employees. People will be scared to come out as whistleblowers if their identities are going to be reflected, because nobody, they will find difficulties getting employed. But since this has got some legal connotations, and obviously, Krishnava, more business for lawyers, you probably are waiting to give some comments here. So can I ask you for your perspective?
So thanks, Ajay. Yes, it's not, though not connected to cybersecurity, this has in terms of the disclosure. I think few things, most of it has been said. From a disclosure perspective, and this is actually a fact, one is the definition of forensic is not there. It's actually what is happening is, in the instance of whistleblowing, you actually, if you report, when you start an audit, you're not alerting the person who you're investigating. Okay, and that's what's missed out completely about disclosure and the whole balance between asymmetrical information between people. But one is it's an undefined term. So what is do I need to appoint an external auditor for forensic, or if I start internally, that is also forensic? So any form of investigation would be forensic. Number two is that without any materiality disclosure, as you said. And number three is also, which I said, that it would whistleblow against a person who they don't investigate. You're actually alerting the persons beforehand that there is an investigation going on. So that is also, to my mind, counterproductive. They probably, I would believe the SEBI will come back and probably define it a bit more, regulate a bit more, and give some more credit to that. It's
There's less areas of controversy, less work for lawyers, so it's okay, but we can live with that. We want our clients to be happy, but unhappy clients, they're not going to look favorably in our business. So that's why we are also trying to get that clarification. So now, very quickly, I think let's move to the second limb, because everybody seems to have talked significantly about that, or the impact of that going forward. So let's come to that very, very quickly. So I mean, obviously now data theft, cybersecurity breaches have been, something which is rampant across the world. We've seen that it's given rise to a new profession of people who are professional negotiators. I understand in the United States, even states in the United States have hired these people to negotiate with hackers and so on and so forth. So obviously it's looming large before us, and in the world of this whole Wi-Fi, the world for work from home environment. So I'm going to pose this question. I'll just frame the question from what I've heard from the comments and something that we had looked at. That there are today a lot of the spaces that are dedicated for work for clients have had all kinds of security norms. You had places where even an employee could not even carry a mobile phone into the environment. And today, the screen of the computer screen, the online server, the systems, computer systems are all available to that person, to the employee, and people who are potentially around or with the employee. So there are confidentiality issues, there are issues of access, there is the shoulder surfing risk. And obviously, since people are using personal gadgets and home Wi-Fi, which are not scared, which are not secure, the whole business email compromise issue, which you talked about, is very significant. So the question to our, again, back to our CFOs, is that we all touched upon this, but exactly what is it that we are going to have to see being done by corporates to deal with this particular issue? So, Ramki, may I start with you on this issue?
Yeah, I think, see, earlier we were always with the perimeter was at an organizational level, right? We were trying to, once you have ring-fenced it at an organization, then you thought that you were safe, or you might do it at a localized level within a particular floor, with a particular building. But that perimeter has shifted actually to so many homes. So how do you create that same organizational perimeter at the individual level? So there is no one today, but things which are happening or in terms of making sure that at that end point where actually the transaction is happening or somebody is doing a process sitting at home, how do you create that environment of security? So of course there are tools, etc. And you talked about shoulder surfing, etc. So for instance, image analytics, right? Or basically the system will, or somebody is taking a photograph, the system will automatically, the screen will automatically shut off if there is, it senses the camera being activated, right? Or even if there is a camera being pointed at. All dynamics. So there are tools which are coming. I think in the question of people using their own devices, so organizations have no other choice but to invest in making sure that shifts completely to company provided devices. And also the other thing is to see that the device which is being used at the home is has very restricted ability to for say copying and printing and stuff like that. It's more like almost like a dumb terminal, but it can do certain transactions, etc. So all these things are happening. So I think just one last point. For instance, Jatin talked about when you process a lot of claims, etc. Right there, you can trust. You can do a straight through processing and then do your backend tests to make sure analytics, etc. But here, when it comes to this security aspect, the trust is never implicit, right? So you have to make sure that trust is not implied, and you have to have the checks and balances to make sure that only the right person has access. And so here the trust cannot be implied. In many other situations, you can have the trust first and checks in the behind. So I think we have significant challenges, but also technology is bringing the solutions for it. And you'll have to invest and you'll have to be ahead of that the game.
So Jatin, will third parties or with entities which are processing third party data or are custodians of third party data, will you think they be at even greater risk? Because it's not just a question of losing their own data to hackers, but it's also the risk of losing third party confidential data to such hackers, to cyber breaches.
Absolutely, Ajay. It's a risk that all of us have to be very acutely aware of, and we have a responsibility to our shareholders and responsibility to our customers, and they're all intermingled in some form of keeping our organization safe. But fundamentally, there are tools, and some of which Ramki alluded to. But there are certain basic or even I would say advanced threat detection systems, proactive approach to cybersecurity. Any good organization, Ajay, will have 6 or 7 basic system which they will want in place before an employee of the organization is even able to do task 1 of his day, of his job. And those things are absolutely critical when one is dealing with not just one's own information and funds, but also that of customer. One of the most most less known facts about cyber crimes, Ajay, is that 95% of the cyber incidents are repeat incidents. So the day zero attack, which are really first time, are rare, and typically, if you're really unfortunate, you will come across one, but 95% it's something which somebody has tried somewhere and it's gonna get tried again. It is dependent on the version of a particular software which you are using. It is your vulnerability in your internet connection. It is the vulnerability of your application. So these are fairly well known, and therefore, so long as you have a very sound, proactive posture, you should be able to feel safe about it. Of course, nothing is 100% safe, but you should have a feeling of well-being and safe if you put some of this in place.
Right. Let me bring you in at this critical juncture from a in-house legal standpoint. You're dealing with a company which has technology, physical goods, all the rest of it, and selling solutions, I'm sure, in terms of technology and security solutions. How do you think preparation needs to be made for this new paradigm that we're dealing with? How would you advise a corporation where you are faced with these issues now?
So, Ajay, I think, and I'm just going to pick Nitin said, right? When folks look at the whole cybersecurity question, it's often house or office, right? So you have a front door, you lock it up, right? You exit. Cybersecurity professionals and all, they don't really public. So there are several ways that anyone can. How do you secure it, right? Functionally, right? You want everybody to go in, you want everybody to use. And so then you ask yourself, do I want to build a fortress around it, right? Expenditure significant. Or you go say anyone from any at all. Put a fence around it. To involve effort, right? And there's a trade-off in what qualities are available. Right? And some will just have a very basic chain, a very basic fencing around it. Maybe have 4 or 5.
Hearing you, is it only me or is others also having the same problem?
Yeah, we can't hear.
We couldn't hear actually.
And so on, right? You couldn't.
I think there's some network issue at his end, which is losing.
There's a lag in the voice.
Yeah. Ajay, I think you're speaking on mute.
Len, you want to put off your video for a second? Maybe that will improve things.
Yeah, better.
Yeah, much better.
Hi.
Please carry on here.
Hi, checking. Am I audible now? Is it better?
Yeah, this is better, but if you can put your video off, I think that the reception may be better.
Hey, great. Apologies for that. Right. So I don't know at what point I dropped off, but my basic point is that people, a lot of cybersecurity professionals look at cybersecurity not as a physical house or office or something, but as a
public garden, park, or something, right? So the question is, do you put a fortress around it? Do you put a chain link fence, right? To what extent do you allow people access into it, right? Then let's say, supposing you have one part of it where you have exotic animals. So do you put special security steps there, right? So those are the questions that cybersecurity experts are really looking at. What's the trade-off in terms of expenses, in terms of availability of functionality, and so on, right? So do you spend a lot, do you really incur a lot of expenses? Do you build chain link fences? But the outcome of it is that people aren't going to be able to use any of the functionalities at all, right? So those are the questions people are looking at, one. The other point, very briefly, which I wanted to talk about was the single most effective thing I think everybody has seen is educate, 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 right? Educate your employees, basic things. Don't click on phishing emails, don't click on spam, right? If you're speaking about something confidential or something, go into a secured room. So invest in education, and I think that will have a very significant outcome. Thank you.
That was very helpful. Very quickly, maybe I'm going to ask you a follow-on question, but I just want to pose it first to one of the CFOs. Mr. Ramakrishnan, if there was, God forbid, a security breach, what are the first 5 or things that would come to your mind as a CFO to immediately implement? And then I want to ask Lair how he thinks he would manage that. And maybe very quickly, Krishna, since we are running out of time and we want a few questions also asked. So can you give us a sense of what you would do if you were informed that there's been an attempted breach or there has been actually a breach? And we already had some incidents of that. Dr. Reddy's has made an announcement that they've had a breach and they've had to shut down certain facilities.
The answer may be theoretical, but number one, I think you have to see, the first thing is from a data security point of view, whether you have had backups, right? So if your backups have been strong, at least anything beyond that, you will be able to control first. Second is, of course, we have to, while the technical guys will be working on making sure how do we come out of the situation and how do we recover, etc. As a KMP, one of the obligations is to you have to inform. Obviously, depending on the severity, etc., you have to definitely inform your own audit committee and board. You have to also disclose it into the shareholders, etc., through the exchanges, depending on the severity and depending, because if it has an impact, this is also an event which can affect the company. So those are basic things which you have to take care. And I think these are 2 or 3 important things which come.
Right. And so you made an important point about disclosure to the stock exchange, which I'll come to subsequently. But Lair, how would you deal with it in terms of how would you, if you were asked to look at this and from a legal standpoint, what are the 4 or 5 top things that you would want to do?
Thank you, Jay. So I think I would step back a bit, right? The first question really, if you have a cybersecurity incident, I think a sophisticated organization should ask itself, right? If you hear that there's a cybersecurity incident or something, the number one question is always, who sets up the first call, right? So do you have a designated SOC, somebody who everybody knows is this individual is going to call, get together everybody and so on. And I think that's the first thing, because you really don't want a situation where everybody's scrambling around saying, okay, what do we do? And so on, right? So the very first thing is identify a focal, right? And the entire organization has to know that's the single point of accountability. if there's an incident, they own it, right? The second thing is who is on that call. And obviously you will have your IT guys, your CIO, forensics, and so on. But, there are a number of other stakeholders, legal, obviously, which I'll speak about afterwards, right? If there are employees involved, you need HR there, right? I mean, basic things like, do you need to put employees on suspension? Do you need to block access? Do you need to conduct investigations and so on? If you have external suppliers, you need to have procurement involved, for instance, right? Then ask yourself, are you going to get into a situation where you need to engage external firms, PR firms, forensics, all of that, right? So those are the few basic issues. Now, in terms of what do we do from a legal perspective, right? Question number one, is it your own data or is it somebody else's, right? One. And then I think the first thing is always go back, look at your customer agreement. Do you have any obligation to go back immediately inform them about it? And I think that's the very first question you need to ask, right? And obviously you'll have to go back, look at the agreement and understand whether you have to take any immediate steps, right? Does your client contract require you to immediately shut down systems, immediately take employees off, all of those, right? The second question you really need to ask yourself is, what reporting obligations do you have, right? So for instance, there is a government agency called CCERT, right? So do you have any reporting obligations under the CCERT rules, right? That's the second thing. The third, and in any large organization, this is always something which is a very hotly debated question. Do you go file an FIR, right? And it's often not a question you can take on your own, right? So if there are clients involved, you need to go back to them and you have to say, we are reporting this to law enforcement, right? So and then the other challenges around filing FIRs are, the first is, to what extent are you really opening up confidential information, all of that, right? That's the first part. The second thing is, do you really have enough information to go and file some FIRs? So think about it. What are you going to say, right? Are you going to say there's a system breach or something, but I still have out exactly what the impact is, right? So it's a very delicate balance, because you don't want to immediately go file an FIR unless you have gathered, some kind of information and so on. But at the same time, you don't want to go and file an FIR after 6, 8 weeks and so on. So I would say first, what I would really look at is, these are the 4 or 5 core issues. Do I have answers to all of those?
All right. That's very helpful. Thank you. Just very quickly, 2 issues that I want to cover before we move to the Q&A. Cloud computing. Jatin, is cloud computing an answer, or cloud computing has the similar issues associated with risk?
So Ajay, cloud has an amazing ability of agility and an excellent scalability and scale down for example. So I'm we all are very excited by virtually everything moving to the cloud, and it's a right answer from efficiency, scalability, agility answer. From security also, I feel it is more secure prima facie, because it doesn't depend on your own intervention at your level, a particular plant, country, a particular office level issues, but it puts it puts all the data at one place, which is far more secure. So it's far more specific, generalized security solution. So I would think it's a better answer than a dispersed system. You could always argue saying, if I had the most secure on-premise data center, will it be more secure than cloud? Yes, of course, it would be more secure than cloud, but you will lose all the other benefits of agility and scalability and cost efficiency. So I would say on the whole, I don't see any extra or a greater risk of security because of cloud. You should follow all the good protocols that you normally follow for an on-premise system for cloud too, including access management and authorization management.
The market seems to be growing for that. Vineet, how do you feel about that being an area of protection?
So I agree with Jatin. I think so. Post the pandemic, we have seen a significant portion or significant demand that has come in for moving a lot of applications from the physical infrastructure to cloud. Earlier, there were some economies, cloud was supposed to be economies of scale, but unfortunately, when reality you would check, it was not that economical as well.
Now, insurance, I also wanted to understand, because some people have been talking about this being growing 40% growth in 2018 and 1.5 lakh crore market in 2024. Is that a reality? Are you really buying cybersecurity insurance in India? Is it available as a protection?
No, so I'll answer that. So just to come in, but yes, cloud adoption is definitely on the significant growth path. Companies which probably had not put cloud as a part of their IT strategy have all of a sudden brought it on the forefront and are overspending on it. I think so. The issue of risk in cybersecurity insurance is a question mark. To my knowledge, we are not seeing many companies offering cybersecurity insurance in India. It is available in some of the developed nations, but it comes at some exhaustive premium. And you really need to, every company needs to really make a call in terms of whether it's worth paying that premium. Maybe over a period of time, if there are too many demands and too much of things coming, the premiums can come down. But it is definitely not a economical the solution at this point of time. And the aspect I would just say is that along with this, you have, though cloud brings in a lot of security, you also need to make investment in a couple of high-end tools. For example, threat hunting, intelligence, vulnerability management, and dedicated security team. We adopted an Azure Sentinel, which is basically, what it does is, in a common layman's terms, it basically brings all the logs that are registered under various tickets or any places and brings it together under one umbrella, and then gives you a lot of analytical data that supports it. It's proving to be very good, but it's the early stages, and we would like to see a lot of development coming. Just coming to the earlier question, I would say we adopt the similar principles of what a couple of years back we did as far as business continuity plan was concerned. Every company had a business continuity plan very well defined, though the scope of business continuity plan was very, very limited. Here you have to really define various themes of what the cybersecurity risks that are bringing in, and define the ownership of what actions need to be taken. And along with that, who are the people? And they need to be constantly trained that if such an incident happens, what is the action that you need to take? In the past, a terrorist attack, people, we didn't know what to do. And people then learned and developed a sort of a response system. The same thing you had to do for a cybersecurity risk, particularly with your own data, clients' data, all those sort of incidents have to be imagined. Think like a thief and think like you are going to create a problem. You can imagine the various circumstances that can come in and have a clearly defined plan on it.
Right. Well, that's very good. We want a few minutes left for Q&A. So just to summarize, I think it's been great. Fraud risk, not so great concern, but the technology risk, cybersecurity risk, the consequences, disclosures to the stock exchange, All of those obviously are greater risks as we identified in the COVID environment. It's very great, very enjoyable to hear all of you. I've learned a lot in the bargain. There are a few questions that have been posed.
Ajay, if I have just a half a minute, I think on the cyber insurance, definitely products are available, and I think organizations should look at seriously. Contrary to what Vinit said, there are products available in India as well as with the international space. Of course, the appetite is low with the insurers, but I think it is something which gives a protection. I think we should take.
Right. Okay, so we have an interesting question. Somebody has asked, due to improved technology and digitization, will accounts and finance department vanish in the next 10 years? Fears of unemployment. I think we already discussed that the human element of the skepticism, human skepticism is critical. Systems cannot run everything. Though I know, Leher, I know somebody in IBM, I think, did say that artificial intelligence is going to at least make lawyers redundant in a few years. So I mean, does anybody have I don't think there's a different response to that. I don't think we have a fear of unemployment in accounts and finance and the statutory auditors. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think one of the questions that has been asked is what kind of capex should organizations allocate towards implementation of digitization automation in this particular environment? I don't know, somebody wants to take a shot at that. Jitin, would you like to take a shot at that? Preet, what about you? Why don't you?
So I only understand IT services industry. I will talk in that context. Roughly 50% of our capex is on IT, largely, including hardware, digitization, software creation, software deployment, as well as cybersecurity. And that is when we are building a lot of buildings. So if we are not, which would be going forward, it would be nearly 70-80% of capex would be towards that. And I think that sort of benchmark should hold good for an IT services firm. And Preet may have a better context from a retail.
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to say that it's difficult. I don't think you can look at a percentage of capex. I think you need to make an assessment of what is the requirement, right? If you're sitting with archaic systems, maybe then your percentage of capex you need to spend on digitizing is much higher. So it totally depends. I think the question itself which is what I wanted to also encourage, if it's coming from finance professionals, is to move away from percentages and look at the context, going back exactly to the point of, are people going to lose jobs? No, if we don't lose our ability to think, then actually, no, we will not. So there isn't a percentage. Every organization needs to define, depending on what state they are in and what is their need. In a year, it may be 70 to 80%, and the next year, it may be 20%.
There's one question that goes to Krishnava is, are Indian data laws well equipped to arrest the nuances of new technology, IoT, blockchain, at a time when Indian corporations are moving to adopt these technologies? Krishnava, do you want to answer that one?
So, I mean, is that no, not yet. Though I'm not an expert that part AI yet. I would not get into answering that. But just one point, Ajay, if I can add, which you discussed on legal obligation, just a quick part. That, of course, in terms of legal obligation for companies, we've seen the data privacy laws, the PDP Act bill, which is pending, the GDPR, where companies are exposed to data for other citizens. One of the, what is paradoxical about this situation is it's usually the victim who becomes the accused. More because of the legislative convenience that you really cannot identify, let alone apprehend the perpetrator. Therefore, other than the contractual and the statutory obligations, which is there in DD bill, or which is there in the mostly the financial services regulation, RBI, IDA, there's a large part which is still technically, which I call the prop data. What I think companies should, and which has already been said, is what we seem to miss is, other than these contractual and statutory obligations, there's a large amount of governance obligations, the duty of care and the fiduciary duty today, when we see board presentations, we have a lot of environmental health, safety as a part of board pack. See too many board processes, I don't know whether they have safety, not of people, but safety of data as a part of board process, which is the culture. And to my mind, that is another piece which the Indian corporate diaspora should be looking into and actually, doing substantially, because it starts with the board process. Because I really don't know how many companies actually have as a part of the agenda safety of data protection. You have environment, health, safety, you have other as a mandatory part. Not only the board process, but also the awareness, I think, which you said, the implementation. Because finally, the fiduciary responsibility, as we've been seeing over the years, it not only with the board, but also very well soon be attached to the KMPs, which is the CFOs here. Finally, there'll be judicial presidents. And whilst we can't stop from being the accused of the victim, at least the defenses that we've taken everything reasonable step, not only in words, but also in action in terms of both process, monitoring, awareness, training, and a whole, it keeps on happening to at least add to that as a defense.
Risk management process, which is focused on
it has to be culture
more widespread.
A part of the board process as a part of a board agenda very often.
You don't have to wait only for LLPR to say that you must have a risk management committee for listed companies. I think it seems that it's necessary across the board for any company which has got data and which has got sensitive data. That I think is a fair comment. I think we've been very good with our timing. We've been very good with all the very forthright and candid responses we've got. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for their contribution, for taking our time today, and for their very honest and open views in the matter. And thank you very much being a part of this discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, CII, and bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think the message which we got is that though the CFOs are concerned, they are not worried, they are not losing sleep, and things are in control and processes are in place. So with that optimistic note, thank you, all Akshay, Jatin, there, Preet, Mr. Ramakrishnan, and Sajid for steering it effectively. Thank you for your time and support. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.